He wasn't born a legend of the sky. He began as a quiet farm boy in northern Wisconsin, a young man who spent more time with mud on his boots than oil on his hands. Yet in just a few intense years during World War II, that boy would become America's ace of aces on the Pacific Front, with 40 confirmed victories in the Lockheed P38 Lightning. His story isn't just about numbers or medals. It's about a personality shaped by the land, sharpened by war, and finally claimed by the risks of rapid technological change. In this video, we'll follow Richard Bong from the fields of poplar to the steaming jungles of New Guinea, from the cockpit of his beloved P-38 Marge to the test runway where his life came to a tragic end. Through his story, we'll also see how the Pacific Air War evolved and how a single determined pilot could make a difference in a vast and brutal conflict. Richard Bong was born on September 24, 1920, on a small farm near Poplar, Wisconsin. He was the first of 9 children in a Swedish-American family. Life on the farm was simple but demanding. There were chores before and after school, long winters and short summers. From an early age, Richard learned discipline, responsibility, and the quiet persistence that would later define his flying style. Like many boys of his generation, he was fascinated by machines. Tractors and trucks caught his eye, but it was an airplane that truly changed his life. When he was 8 years old, he watched a mail plane pass overhead on its way to a nearby town. The sound of the engine and the sight of the aircraft against the sky stayed with him. He later said that from that moment, he knew he wanted to be a pilot. That dream, born high above the fields of Wisconsin, would guide nearly every major choice he made. In high school, Bong wasn't a glamorous or arrogant figure. Friends described him as quiet, friendly, and sometimes shy. He played sports, did well in class, and showed a strong interest in mechanics. What really stood out, however, was his eye-hand coordination. He became an excellent shot with a rifle, both for hunting and for target practice. That marksmanship, learned on the farm and in the woods, would later translate directly into deadly accuracy with machine guns in the air. By the late 1930s, the world was sliding toward war. In Europe, new conflicts were erupting. In Asia, the Japanese Empire was pushing deeper into China and eyeing the rich islands of Southeast Asia. In the United States, many people still hoped to stay out of foreign wars, but the military quietly prepared. The Army Air Corps began expanding its flying programs, and that created an opportunity for young men like Richard Bong. After finishing high school, Bong attended the Superior State Teachers College. There he joined the Civilian Pilot Training Program, a federal initiative designed to increase the pool of trained pilots in case of war. For Bong, this was the first big step from dream to reality. He learned basic flight on light training aircraft. Instructors quickly noticed his calm hands and natural feel for the controls. He didn't struggle with fear or nausea. Instead, he was relaxed and focused, and he showed a strong instinct for judging distance and angle during maneuvers. By 1941, the situation in the Pacific was becoming critical. The United States, though still officially at peace, expected conflict with Japan. Bong applied for the Army Air Corps' Aviation Cadet Program and was accepted. He reported to flight training and began the process of becoming a military pilot. Training in the pre-war and early wartime years was intense and sometimes brutal. There were long days of classroom study, navigation practice, and physical conditioning. New cadets learned the fundamentals of flight, then moved on to more advanced aerobatics and combat maneuvers. Some washed out, unable to handle the stress or complexity. Bong thrived. He wasn't flashy. He was methodical and precise. Instructors noticed that his gunnery scores were remarkably high. When he fired at towed targets, his bursts were short, well-timed, and accurate. As Bong progressed, he moved to faster and more powerful aircraft. Eventually, he trained on the twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The P-38 was a unique and advanced fighter for its time. With its twin booms, central pod, and heavy armament clustered in the nose, it had both speed and hitting power. It also demanded respect. The aircraft required careful handling during high-speed dives and could be unforgiving if flown carelessly. Many pilots loved it. Some feared it. Bong fell in love with it. With its concentrated guns, the P-38 rewarded precise aim more than long bursts. Bong, with his farm-trained marksmanship and calm temperament, was perfectly matched to this characteristic. He didn't waste ammunition. He waited, closed in, and fired at close range. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States entered the war. Newly trained pilots suddenly found themselves in demand. Bong completed his training in early 1942. His skills were so impressive that one of his instructors, the famous pilot and record setter Charles Lindbergh, commented on his abilities. After receiving his wings and commission as a second lieutenant, Bong expected to be sent overseas at once. At first, however, he served briefly as an instructor, helping other pilots learn to handle fighters. There's a famous story from this period. Stationed in California, Bong was reprimanded for flying low over a residential area and blowing laundry off a clothesline with the wake of his aircraft. As punishment, he was ordered to wash the clothes and apologize to the household. The incident shows a glimpse of his playful side, but it also hints at his growing confidence behind the controls. In September 1942, Bong was finally sent to the Southwest Pacific. The theater was harsh and remote. American and Australian forces were fighting to halt Japanese advances in New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. Airfields were carved out of jungle and mud. Aircraft maintenance was difficult. Pilots faced both the enemy and the environment. Bong was assigned to the 49th Fighter Group, which operated P-38s in defense of Australia and in offensive operations over New Guinea. His first combat missions were escort flights and patrols. At the beginning, he was a little too eager, at times losing formation while chasing contacts. His commanders reminded him that discipline and teamwork were essential. Bong adapted quickly. On December 27, 1942, he scored his first confirmed victories, shooting down 2 Japanese fighters over Buna. The experience confirmed his belief in his own skills, but also showed the deadly realities of air combat. The Japanese pilots he faced were often experienced and aggressive. Many flew the nimble Mitsubishi Zero fighter, which could outturn the heavier P-38 at certain speeds. Bong learned to use his aircraft's strengths. He avoided tight, low-speed dogfights and instead used dives, climbs, and the superior firepower of his Lightning. During his first tour of duty, which stretched through late 1943, Bong steadily increased his score. He flew missions over New Guinea, often in poor weather and over dense jungle. Navigation errors were fatal. A downed pilot might wait days or weeks for rescue if he survived at all. Bong showed excellent situational awareness and a solid sense of direction. He wasn't a reckless loner. He usually flew as part of a team, working with his wingmen to trap Japanese aircraft and cover each other during attacks. By the end of his first tour, he had become one of the leading aces in the theater with more than 20 victories. He also gained a reputation for modesty. When other pilots and ground crews praised him, he shrugged off the attention. For Bong, the focus was on doing his duty and bringing his men home, not on chasing records. In late 1943, Bong was sent back to the United States for rest and publicity duty. He had already become a figure of interest for the American press. A farm boy turned top ace made for a compelling story during a war in which the home front needed heroes. During this period, he met Marjorie Vatndal, a young woman from his home region who had been a college student and model. The two quickly developed a close relationship. Bong was famous enough that newspapers back home began running photos of Marjorie and stories about the couple. When he returned to combat, he named his P-38 after her, painting her portrait and the word Marge on the nose of the aircraft. This created one of the most iconic images of the Pacific Air War, the smiling face of Marjorie on the sharp nose of a deadly fighter. In early 1944, Bong returned to the Pacific for his second tour. By now, the nature of the air war had changed. Allied forces were pushing the Japanese back along the long chain of islands toward the Philippines. Air bases advanced step by step. The range of operations increased, sometimes involving long flights over open water. Bong served as a gunnery instructor as well as a combat pilot. Officially, he was not required to fly many missions, but he volunteered again and again. He felt responsible for showing an example and for using his skills where they mattered most. Some commanders worried that he was taking unnecessary risks. General George Kenny, his theater air commander, admired him but also feared losing him. Despite these concerns, Bong continued to fly, and his score climbed rapidly. On April 12, 1944, he scored his 26th and 27th victories over Hollandia, officially surpassing the record set by World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker. This was a significant psychological moment. For the public, it symbolized the maturity of American air power. For Bong, it was another day of deadly work, though he understood the symbolic power of the achievement. Over the skies of New Guinea and the Philippines, Richard Bong continued his hunt. He wasn't one for flashy maneuvers or long-range sprays of gunfire. His method was patient, calculated, and deadly. He preferred to surprise his enemy, diving from above or slipping in from behind, closing to a range where his short, controlled bursts couldn't miss. This discipline conserved ammunition and made every shot count. But Bong's character wasn't just defined by his skill. He was known for his generosity, often giving credit for his own kills to his wingmen if he felt they deserved recognition. This means his official score of 40 victories might actually be a conservative estimate. Fellow pilots and historians have long suspected he shot down more planes than the records show. As his tally climbed towards 40, the spotlight on Bong grew brighter. He was a sensation back home. Newsreels featured his exploits, and newspapers ran photos of him smiling beside the portrait of Marge on his plane. His image was used in war bond drives, turning the quiet farm boy into a national symbol of American strength. For a man who naturally shied away from attention, it was an uncomfortable role, but he accepted it as part of his duty. By December of 1944, he officially hit 40 confirmed victories. That was it for General Kenny. Bong had flown over 140 combat missions. The risk of losing America's top ace was too high. He was ordered back to the States, forbidden from flying any more combat. Bong protested, wanting to stay with his unit, but the decision was final. Returning to America, Bong was no longer just a pilot. He was a national hero. He was promoted and awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, for his extraordinary courage and relentless spirit in the Pacific. General Douglas MacArthur himself presented the medal, cementing Bong's place among America's most revered warriors. Yet through it all, he remained incredibly modest. In interviews, he consistently deflected praise, crediting his ground crew, his fellow pilots, and his commanders. He'd say any success he had was a team effort. When asked about being the best, he'd just shrug it off and say he was lucky. While the war was winding down, military technology was racing ahead. The age of propeller planes was giving way to the age of jets. The Army Air Forces needed its best pilots to test these new, powerful, and often unpredictable machines. With his unmatched combat record and superb flying skills, Bong was a natural choice. He was assigned as a test pilot at Lockheed in Burbank, California, working on the new P-80 Shooting Star. The P-80 was a leap into the future, far faster than the P-38 he was used to. But this new technology came with new dangers. Early jet engines were unreliable, and the physics of high-speed flight were still being discovered. Bong approached test flying with the same quiet determination he'd shown in combat. He understood the risks and accepted them as part of the job. His work was vital, helping engineers refine the aircraft and push American aviation into the jet age. On August 6, 1945, Bong took off from Burbank in a P-80 for what should have been a routine test flight. But shortly after takeoff, the jet's engine failed. At such a low altitude, he had no time. He tried to bail out, but his parachute couldn't deploy fully before the aircraft crashed and exploded. Richard Bong was killed instantly. The news of his death was a tragic headline on a day already filled with world-changing events. That very same day, the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. As the world reeled from the dawn of the nuclear age and the impending end of the war, the loss of America's ace of aces was somewhat overshadowed. But for his family, his new wife Marjorie, and the men who flew alongside him, the loss was immense and deeply personal. Richard Bong was only 24 years old. In a few short years, he had gone from a quiet farm to the top of the pilot pantheon, a name forever etched into the history of World War II. His story is so compelling because he wasn't a myth. He was real. He wasn't some superhuman figure. He was a disciplined, hardworking, and humble young man who was given a dangerous job and did it better than anyone else. To truly grasp his impact, we have to look at the state of the Pacific Air War when he arrived. Allied forces were on the back foot. Japanese pilots were seasoned veterans, their aircraft often more maneuverable. But the tide turned with new planes like the P-38 and new tactics. Bong mastered the P-38, proving what the twin-engine fighter could do. Its long range was perfect for the vast Pacific, and its concentrated nose guns could tear an enemy plane apart in a single pass. He and pilots like him systematically wore down the Japanese Air Forces, theater by theater. His career also highlights the psychological aspect of war. Aces were more than just pilots with high scores. They were symbols of hope and inspiration, both for their comrades and for the public back home. Their victories boosted morale. But this celebrity came with a heavy burden. The higher an ace's score, the more devastating their loss would be, which is why commanders like Kenny were so keen to protect them by eventually pulling them from the front lines. But numbers don't tell the whole story. Fellow pilots remembered Bong as a mentor, always willing to help younger flyers with maps and tactics. Ground crews recalled his deep respect for their work, always crediting them for keeping his plane, Marge, in perfect fighting condition. He never boasted. In fact, the attention often seemed to make him uncomfortable. His romance with Marjorie, whose face adorned his cockpit, added a deeply human element to his legend. It was a constant reminder that behind the warrior was a man with a life, a family, and a future he was fighting for. They married in February of 1945, just a few precious months before his death. Their story is a poignant example of how war forces life's biggest moments into the smallest windows of time between missions and mortal danger. After the war, Bong's memory was woven into the fabric of American history. In his home state of Wisconsin, bridges, airports, and streets were named in his honor. Today, when we look back at the aces of World War II, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers game, the competition for the highest score. But that's not how Bong saw it. For him, each mission was about duty, survival, and protecting the men flying with him. His priority was always the mission and his comrades. From a broader historical view, his 40 victories were a vital part of the larger strategy to win air superiority in the Pacific. Every bomber he saved, every enemy fighter he shot down, helped isolate Japanese forces and cripple their ability to fight back. In that sense, he played a direct role in turning the tide of the war. His tragic death in a jet is also symbolic. It bridges two distinct eras of aerial warfare. He dominated the skies in one of the most advanced propeller fighters of the war, the P-38, and died helping to introduce the next generation of jet aircraft. It's a stark reminder that progress, especially in military technology, often comes at a steep human cost, even away from the battlefield. For anyone fascinated by World War II, Bong's story is layered and rich. There are the technical details of his plane and tactics, the strategic importance of his victories, and the human drama of his life. But what stays with you is the image of a quiet, talented young man who met extraordinary success with unshakable humility. Let's close with an image. Picture a humid dawn on a dusty airstrip in New Guinea. P-38 Lightnings are parked in the morning half-light. A slim pilot with a calm face climbs into a cockpit, a woman's portrait painted on its nose. He runs his checks, gives a thumbs up to the ground crew, and pushes the throttles forward. The engines roar, and the plane races down the runway, lifting into the sky. For Richard Bong, this wasn't a quest for fame. It was his job, it was his duty, and it was his way of fighting for his country. His legacy lives on in the stories we tell, honoring all who flew in the vast, dangerous skies of the Pacific War. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing for more.